lungs taste the air of time blown past fallen sand.
Welcome back to another round of sparring. This time you get to catch a glimpse of our sponsor, the Elf of Wiggly Swords. The rule set for this fight is pretty loose, but essentially I will be staying on for the entirety of the fight until my opponents are ready to swap out. We are making use of the full haul for this one, no piste for us, because this encourages decent footwork and creative sword fighting. It is also good for your endurance, because it means you're moving around more. But the rules are first decent hit wins, of a double, the best hit of the two, or we replay. In this first proper exchange, my opponent cuts in at my right side and hits my shoulder, which I respond to by thrusting him directly in the throat. A lovely exchange. But what happens here is my opponent sort of feints to thrust. He goes as if he's going up into arcs, feints, turns his sword around and cuts. I dodge out the way and then I impale him through the neck. So, what happens here? I push in to stab him in the face and miss. I then push in closer as if to grapple, but he beats me to it, grabbing my sword and then bringing his around to cut. I lift my left arm up to protect my head and take the shot on my wrist. This, I think, is good practice for two reasons. One, it prevents head injuries, and if it was a real fight, that would be super useful to have. And two, if this was a tournament fight, him striking him in the arm would afford him 2 points as opposed to 3, so I'd actually be saving myself points as well. Another quick little exchange. My opponent goes as if to thrust at me, which I displace. I also miss my thrust, so I simply turn it into a middle how and cut at his wrist. My flamboyant fellow fencer has decided to join us, now he's gotten all of his gear on. This next exchange coming up marks a break from tradition. Me and my opponent usually get into these loops where one of us delivers a Zornhau, which is blocked with a hanging parry or a posta di donna, and then is then returned with another Zornhau, and we go back and forth in this again and again. But as you can see here, after my first cut, I don't actually do a parry, I dodge, I then thrust back, and as he's occupied dodging, I cut his belly. He's then so out of measure he can't deliver a follow-up cut. I'm not being rude here, my eyes are simply closed as I adjust my mask, so I miss his fist to start with. Very quick turnaround here. My opponent steps in to thrust. I don't quite catch it properly and he hits me on the hand. I should have had my blade a little further forwards. I then respond with a nice tasty thrust in the chest. Very rapid exchange of blows here. My opponent comes in with a thrust. I catch him with the false edge on the way down and he hits me in the elbow. So both hand and arm hits. An emergency stoppage is called. A tiny piece of plastic has been seen and must be cleared. Gods forbid anyone would get hurt. After a close call with the debris, we're back with this particularly strange exchange. What happens here is he first comes in with a cut, which I dodge out the way of. I then follow up with a thrust of my own, which I am out of measure for. He goes to cut high, and I duck all the way out the way and expect to thrust him in the face, but he ducks, so I have to turn my blade around and bonk him on the top of the head. We then engage in mutual deranged laughter. Another rapid exchange here. He cuts in, and I manage to get my thrust in just before his comes in, and it actually blocks his blade and locks it in place. You can see the flex on my blade there as he tries to bend it out of the way, and it's just already pinned against his pec. Cheeky little exchange here where I try and take his torse off. I slide my blade down his blade, and then as I'm sliding back up, I sort of flick the front of his torse. I then raise my blade as if to cut high, he draws to parry, and I cut him on the wrist. As he leaves, he doffs his torse at me indignantly. A great example of locking your opponent's blade out here. I get my thrust in first before he can deliver a cut, and between my blade and crossguard, his blade gets pinned. So he can't actually deliver the cut, and it's a spectacular way to kill your opponent while looking like you knew what you were doing, and it wasn't entirely an accident. My opponent fingers his torse nervously, and I explain that it's coming off. I will take it off, because that's the whole aim of the fight. Since wearing this for the first time, it's become sort of the whole point of fencing Jamie, to knock his torse off. So it's a constant endeavour to try and do so. Lovely fast little exchange here. My opponent goes to cut and misses. I slide my back foot around, giving me the angle to then deliver my own cut to the very top of his mask with the false edge of my blade. I think tired of being stabbed in the chest, my opponent adopts Von Tag. I respond to him with Alba. He then aggressively cuts at me and is rewarded with this nice little double headshot on me. I particularly like his little skip he does here. Very nice. Bamboozled having beaten me, my opponent responds with a lovely little strike to the top of the knee, and then I respond with a cut to the wrist. An interesting little exchange here. I sort of snake my blade down and under his guard to the other side. I then push in with the point and manage to score a thrust to his arm, I believe. He then feints and cuts me on the side of the head. Here I feint a thrust, and as he goes to push my blade out of the way, I cut his right hand and then cover up, blocking his riposte on my shield. After some after about 3 or 4 different feints, my opponent manages to miss his one-handed thrust, to which I respond by just sort of slapping him with the flat of the blade. After my opponent misses his glazen, he panics, leaving me free to essentially rush in, threatening him with the point and then hitting him right on the top of the head. In hindsight, I should have taken his torso off here, but I think I was just sort of so taken aback at the fact that he was just straight panicking that I just figured I'd hit him. It's something that happens more often than you'd think, but seldom enough to be worth noting. I actually managed to parry, if you can call it that, his follow-up strike on the gap between my hands on the handle of the blade. After a somewhat drawn-out tippy-tappy back and forth, my opponent rushes in, cuts my wrist, and then triumphantly runs away under the cover of his sword. This was a particularly good run up to a Torse scalping. I thrust in, he parries high, he then engages a grapple, grabs my arm, I manage to put my sword back over and cover his attack. I attack him, he covers up one-handed, he's then sort of like out of options, so I attack, and all he can do is go, huh! as I thrust the Torse off his head. As I've said before, this is basically the highlight of the fight for me. If I can get that damn thing off his head, I can go home quite happy. My opponent kind of sets himself up for this one by calling this his last exchange, so I dutifully deliver a finishing move. What I do is I let him come to me, I engage him in the bind, I grab his sword by the blade with my left hand, I then thrust him through the throat, turn my blade, and with perfect edge alignment, decapitate his entire head with a draw cut. Beautiful. So outraged at having been killed with a finisher move, my opponent deems to have another final exchange. Here, he cuts towards me twice, he then catches my wrist while I catch his temple, I then wrap his blade up and place my sword back to his head. Due to a final exchange having to end on a one-sided clean kill, we have another go at it. In this particular exchange, my opponent feints and we both thrust in and catch each other on the neck. Finally, the fight is ended on a clean kill. My opponent tries to get his point online, cannot, so I lift his blade up and out of the way and chop the top of his head off. Having completed this final exchange, I assume the fight is over and I can call it a day. However, a torseless fancy boy enters the field for a final boss battle. Truly epic end to the fight. His only weakness, prowl to the top of the head. Thanks for watching to the end if you're still with me. If you'd like to see more of this, please subscribe.